AI automations are everywhere now. However, I'm noticing that so many people are doing it wrong. When I first got started 12 months ago, I built one of the OG templates in the AI automation space. We've sold to over 600 customers this year and have since built the Big Moves AI automation marketplace. And when we first got started, there were very few people talking about AI automations online, which means we had to figure it out for ourselves. And when we first got started, for example, the template that I sold, we had 24 different automations. It would take 3 to 4 hours to set up if you had some type of idea of what to do. If you were a beginner, it would take you like 6 or 7 hours to set up this entire template. Whereas now we're about to launch version 3.0 that takes less than 10 minutes to set up the entire template, yet it does even more than the very first version. But what I'm noticing online is that people are still using the same techniques that we were talking about 12 months ago. Very few people are adapting to faster, more simpler ways when we are creating these AI automation templates. So in this video, I'm going to give you 9 advanced AI automation tips that you can take away and begin using today so that you can build more streamlined automation, set them up so much faster, and have proper systems that actually help your workflows rather than just create a whole heap of mess and chaos that you're always constantly fixing up all the time. Now, this is especially important for you if you do want to sell AI automation templates on the Big Moves marketplace. If you do, there'll be a link down below, but these techniques must be followed in order for us to add a product to the marketplace, because for us, having the highest quality systems and templates is the number one thing that we look for before we put something on the marketplace, because we don't want to waste anybody's time. So let's dive into these 9 tips now. And tip number 1 is to focus on systems, not just automations. A lot of the time, what happens when you see these different school communities and TikToks that are online is that they just focus on blueprints, and they give you one blueprint to download for free, which is great for lead gen. It looks impressive, but if you just import that into your own account, then it's not really going to solve anything. It might look good initially, but what you'll quickly find out is that just simply downloading and importing a blueprint means absolutely nothing to you and your business in order to generate more leads, make more sales, drive down the complexity of operations. The way that we need to shift is a fundamental understanding that businesses scale systems. We don't just scale tiny workflows and things like that. It's a systemized approach that needs to happen before we start to automate anything. Otherwise, you're just going to create more headaches than you actually need. And doing the task manually will often be so much faster than trying to automate just a tiny part of it. There are exceptions, but this is like the big fundamental change and shift in thinking that we need to make in order to build these really solid systems. So as you can see, I build predominantly in Airtable currently, and we have all of our different workflows built into this interface here. So the product workflow, for example, helps us launch digital products. We have 8 steps there, or we have 6 steps to launch the product and a couple that happen afterwards. We have our content automation system. So the content automation system is the one that over 600 people have purchased. Everybody's minds were pretty much blown when they downloaded this and figured out the things that could happen inside of that template. If you want to watch it for free, they're on my YouTube channel as well. But we're thinking in terms of full content systems, right? We're not just trying to automate small little parts. Like we have literally the 6 steps it takes me to write copy and add copy and email copy and plan every single part of a digital product launch is created inside of Airtable, and we have a few make.com automations that go off and the AI generates all the copy at once. And the big reason why we can do that is if we build systems, we can line up all of our prompts that we want the AI to run through and allow the AI to iterate through them automatically. So in theory here, if I had 1,000 product copywriting prompts, I could load all of these 1,000 prompts up here, trigger the copy, and it will run through the automations on autopilot until basically the system breaks or it completes, which is pretty cool. So this is how we can get 10x productivity rather than just trying to automate something for the sake of automating something. So that's number 1. And number 2, I'm going to come back to Airtable in just a moment because a lot of the stuff revolves around having a base to build from. But number 2 is if you are building blueprints inside tools like make.com, for example, then what we used to do was we would have to remap all of our Airtable modules because basically the way make.com is built, if we imported a blueprint, so what happens is typically you'll export a blueprint and then you'll import one into a client account, or if we're selling a product, then we will give those blueprints as part of that product. And then what would normally happen is all of these Airtable modules here would have to be remapped again in its entirety. And this is why it took 3 to 4 hours to set up one of the previous templates, is because we would have to go through and remap every single Airtable module and some of the other modules as well. Whereas what we're actually doing now is, you can see here in this first one, we're actually making API calls with Airtable instead of using the pre-built Airtable modules for create a record or get a record and so forth. The benefit of this is that we can push in the IDs from the base, the table, and the record ID inside of Airtable so that it will automatically map to the right IDs. So the problem previously was that we would have to change the base ID and the table ID manually in the drop-down menus of the typical make.com Airtable modules. Whereas now we just trigger the base IDs and the table IDs from Airtable, so that then all we need to do from this point on is we can just make our API calls with some JSON and change the different fields and statuses and so forth that we have inside of Airtable, and send all the data back to Airtable with JSON. So this takes away all of the remapping that used to happen, so that we can import these blueprints so much faster. So this is important for a number of reasons. Number one, if you're selling a template, you don't want to be giving your customers 3 to 4 hour setup times for a product. I learned the hard way. It's not the best way to do things when there are better ways. Secondly, though, let's say you're an AI automation agency owner, you have your base template that you use to install into all your clients. You don't want to be remapping all of these fields when you install your automations into client accounts either. So it's just better in every way possible. All it takes is just learning a little bit of JSON, and you don't really need to know much, because ChatGPT will write most of it for you if you need that help. But there's a few extra little things that we need to know. And as soon as you've done it a couple of times, you'll pick it up and you'll understand it so much easier for every other workflow as well. So that's number 2. Number 3 is having some sort of base to build from as well. So like I said, I use Airtable. There's other good options out there like SmartSuite. To a certain degree, Notion could actually work as well. But having a base where you can have control over so many different parts of the automations themselves. So for example, we now have an AI model table that is built into this base that can now be referenced in any of the AI automations we build. So the reason why that is valuable is because there are always brand new AI models coming out. So if you don't do it this way, then you have 2 options. The first really slow option, which is what we first did, is you have to go inside to your automation platform, whether it's make.com, come into your modules, then change the model ID from this section here, and then you would have to repeat that for every single automation that you have. Now, if you really understand the concept of AI automations and how this is going to 10x how fast you can build your business, then eventually you're going to end up with dozens, maybe hundreds of automations. So imagine having to do that every 3 months, go in and change the model every 3 months to the latest model. But the second part to this is that each of these AI LLMs have pros and cons and things that they're better at and things that they're not so good at, depending on the certain part of the automation you're going to be using this in. So you actually want to select different AI models at different times, depending on the task that you're trying to get it to do. So right now, for example, I write all of my copy with Claude. Like Claude is by far the best copywriter right now, whereas a lot of the reasoning when we're doing project planning is actually much better to use something like an OpenAI o1 or an OpenAI GPT 4.0 latest. Like their reasoning capabilities for project planning is just so much better. So we use those in those scenarios. The second option that we used to do up until basically a week or 2 ago was we would have a single select field inside of our Airtable where all of these models lived, which was one step ahead so that we didn't have to go into make.com and we could have more control here. But again, if we have now, say, a dozen of these workflows where we would need to go in and update each one when a new model comes out, then it's just not really a viable option. All we need to do now is we just come into, well, we work from our interfaces predominantly. We have our brand settings up the top and our AI models here. So let's say a new model comes out, then all we need to do is just click this plus sign here, add a model, and then add in all of the details that we need. So that's advanced AI automation tip number 3. The next part of this is continuing on with the brand assets tab, is that we can have these fields that set a lot of the information for our brand up front. So we always want to be telling the AI when we're using it, things like brand voice guidelines, any excluded words we have, who's the customer avatar that we're trying to target. There might be some instances where it makes sense to talk about the brand as well. So if you didn't build a brand assets tab like this, then you would have to manually feed this information into the AI every single time that you are actually using it. But what we do now is we use a feature inside of Airtable called linked records. So basically here you can see that we have these linked records and what they call lookup fields, where it's linked to the brand assets tab. So anytime we make a change in the brand voice guidelines, for example, as long as the brand assets tab is linked to all of the other tables inside of Airtable that we use those brand assets on, then it will update every single workflow that it is linked into. So again, this comes back to number one, which is having a systems approach and a system design thinking when it comes to building these types of workflows. Otherwise, you're just going to cause so much downstream effects and complications with your workflows that you'll spend 90% of your time trying to fix old things all the time. So we want to be taking a very structured approach to building all of these. So that's number 4. And let's continue on with this theme again now as well, is a lot of people are still getting stuck using just the ChatGPT modules inside of make.com or these other automation platforms, or they might be using just Claude or Anthropic modules as well. Whereas there's actually a couple of platforms now, and we've chosen to go with OpenRouter, that will allow us to tap into any of these AI models that we want to use from the one platform. So all we need to do is fund our OpenRouter AI developer account with all the credits that we want. And then now we have access to basically any model that we want that is supported by OpenRouter, which is most of them. We can change the models depending on the type of workflow that we want to operate. We don't have to set up Anthropic. We don't have to set up OpenAI. We don't have to set up Perplexity. They're already included inside OpenRouter. Now, there is a small extra cost. I think it's about 7% extra that you need to pay when using this. But in order to save time building and maintenance down the track and changing all your models all the time, then it's totally worth it. And I'm pretty sure there's other options out there. It's not just OpenRouter. There's plenty of others that allow it to do it as well. We're using Replicate AI with AI images as well. So like there's plenty of options out there to choose from. I'm not just necessarily selling OpenRouter. I'm just saying that we need to be thinking long-term in terms and systems design in terms of what we're building so that we can really maximize our AI automations. The next big benefit of thinking from a systems type of approach is having all of your prompts that you use over and over again in something like a prompt library. So again, we can link these records of the prompt library into any of our workflows so that when we want to run an automation prompt, we can just select it from the field here, just like this. We have all of our YouTube prompts filtered for this YouTube workflow, and they're just pulling directly from this prompt library here. Now, the cool extra benefits that we're literally working on this week is having more customizations for our prompt library as well. So we actually have an output variations structure here so that we can determine how many outputs we want the automation to provide for us as well. We can also start to now feed back good examples of outputs that we're getting for our YouTube videos or our social media content or our emails. And if we provide a template to follow from our prompt library plus a really solid output that we like, that is good for our brand, it's starting to have a bit of a feedback loop of what is good and what isn't, so that every single time when it starts using that prompt in future, then it starts creating something that's much more on brand than if you were to just give it a prompt, for example. So again, it's back to the systems design. If we can feed these AI models as much information as possible and that is relevant about our brand, then we're going to get much higher quality outputs. And your AI outputs that you do get from these types of systems are not even detectable. They don't look anything like your typical ChatGPT post that you see all over the internet now. That all looks the same, no matter what niche you're in. So it all comes back to like using these advanced systems is the way to stand out, work so much faster, and just have really solid internal systems that are enjoyable to use as well. Now, in this example, I'm going to get very specific and dive really deep into a pretty advanced automation that we're running here right now. And it's probably going to go over a lot of people's heads, but for those that have been sticking around for a long time, and especially if you've seen this template in the past, you'll understand this, but it's also a great way to understand a deeper concept. And the concept is this: we're doing so much more now inside of Airtable and Make.com using 20% of the automations that we used to do and the tables that we used to use. So for example, this was the old version of Content Automation OS. So you can see across the top here, all of the different tables that we had. And then like I mentioned at the start, we had 24 different Make.com automations. Whereas now, if you look at this one is about to be released. We have just 5 tables across the top here, but the template does actually more than the original template that has a dozen or more different tables across the top. But not only that, we also have just 5 Make.com scenarios that do the same amount of work. So recently I bought a Tesla, and I'm inspired by Elon and when he talks about how they remove as much from the building process when it comes to building rockets and cars and anything else that they're building. He tries to remove as much as possible, and it should get to the point where the thing will break and you have to add that last thing that you removed back in to make it work. And I've been taking that concept with all of the automations that I've been building. So that's how we've got it down to so little inside of here, but it still achieves the same output. Now, the big thing that I want to get to here is if we've basically consolidated all of our workflows into the one table, which means every single field that we need across here is in the one table. So if we push the information for a podcast into Make.com, it's also going to reference like the YouTube tabs and newsletter tabs and so forth. So we're actually just running extra AI prompts to remove any of the data that we don't need. We're giving it every single field that it needs the context of. And then we're simply saying in the context above, there are some fields that do not have any data. Your task is to remove those fields and keep the fields that do have data. So we're just giving it an extra AI prompt before we send it into our official automation in order to run through the prompt library that we're sending that through. So there are a few things that we can do like this that was super hard to do before AI that can just be done so much easier now. And there's very few instances, if any at all, where it doesn't run correctly. So like these are the ways that we can streamline our operations just by using AI on a completely different paradigm, because when we're building these types of systems, we're thinking about how can we create the content, but at the same time, we could actually be using AI to streamline the operational complexity as well, so that we're bringing together both of them into the one automation so that it does create just a much more user-friendly, easier way to build things. The next thing I want to talk about is when you're building in a base like Smart Suite or Airtable like this one, we can actually do so much with filters in our interfaces now as well. So like I was showing before, like we have these different workflows for YouTube, videos, podcasts, newsletters, all of that type of stuff. And they link through to our prompt library. Now that prompt library has 300, 400 different prompts that we want to use. So if we were to open this up without any filtering, then that would actually get pretty convoluted very quickly. And trying to sort through that would be so hard to do. Whereas what we can actually do is we can filter certain sections inside of our interfaces to only show the prompts that we want to see at this particular point. So all we need to do to do that is in these sections here where we're pulling from the prompt library, we just have our filters saying the prompt type is podcast, and it will only pull in the podcast prompts. So we can do that on every single workflow, which allows us to store all of the prompts in the one base, but only allow certain parts of the workflow to operate at the right time. So this helps if you're trying to train your team on how to use these interfaces. This helps people like me who sell these templates in order to train the customers on how to use them. Having as little complexity in all of these types of workflows is the best way to operate them. And there's just little tricks and hacks that you find for your different tables and your different softwares that allow you to build differently. And I say this because when I first started building these AI automations, I hired a contractor in order to help me, and he actually steered me in the wrong direction. He said, don't even think about interfaces until you get the base right and the tables right and all of those filters right. So I didn't even think about this for like 6 months at all. But what I realized is we could actually do a lot with our Airtable interfaces and the filtering that allow us to build the tables differently. But you need to understand what the interfaces can do first before you actually can build the tables exactly how you want them. So you do need to understand these software tools comprehensively in order to find the fastest ways, the most efficient ways to build these types of workflows and dashboards and interfaces for you and your team as well. Now, the final one that I want to talk about is chopping and changing from different platforms all the time. I'm noticing this coming up a lot. And I also notice that there are a lot of people, it's more so beginners who don't have a lot of money. So I do understand it from that sense. But there are a lot of people chopping and changing these different platforms because of extra value here and there. If there is very clear-cut value in terms of what you get from another platform, then sure, go ahead, do that, especially if you only have a couple of automations to move across. But one of the best pieces of information that I received in my entire life that transformed my business from barely making six figures to then building a seven-figure business was a mentor said to me, Mitch, you pay in either money or time. And often that paying in money is actually the faster way to grow. And what he meant by that in this scenario would be something like a lot of people are trying to save $13 a month by moving across to a different platform and not thinking about the time involved it takes to continue moving across all the time. So they might spend 5-10 hours moving all the automations across to another platform and relinking them up and so that type of stuff. But you have to ask, what is your time really valued at? So if you're trying to save $13 when your business is doing more than six figures, you definitely need to think about your priorities quite a lot. Sometimes it's just easier to pay that little bit extra because it frees up so much mental space and you don't have an extra project to go onto. And you need to be thinking about making money, not about how many operations are you going to run this month. So while I do agree changing if you really need to, if it's going to save you hundreds or thousands of dollars a month, totally makes sense. But trying to save $13 here and there is probably not going to get you to where you want to be. If you're not making the amount of money that you want to make, then you should be spending 80% of your time on marketing and sales. That's the best information that I got. That's what transformed my business. I wanted to share that with you as well. But that is it for me. So I would love to hear any more advanced tips that you have. And if I'm totally wrong on some of them, call me out. I want to learn as well. So comment down below and I'll see you in the next video.